Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Heather from Children's Book World, and I am so excited to have two of my favorite authors tonight, one ex-staff member. Here with me, we are celebrating Rachel Hartman and her new book, In the Serpent's Wake, and Fran Wilde, whose new book, Ship of Stolen Words. Yes, there it is going to be in conversation with her in a few minutes. I want to apologize to everybody first. I had a lovely display of books at the store where I was planning to do this broadcast from, so you could just see all their beautiful work. And when I got to the store, I realized my computer was here. So I ran back here and did not have time to get back to the store. So hopefully you won't hear my family screaming about the Olympics downstairs, and all will be well. I know you guys all know Rachel from her New York Times best-selling book, Seraphina. She's won countless awards, the Morris Award, which is a very prestigious award. And of course, Fran has books for YA, middle grade, and adults, as well as poetry. Her new book is Ship of Stolen Words. She is also an award-winning author, winning the Nebula Award and countless others. And I am going to remind people that in the lovely chat area where you can comment, say hi, ask questions, tell us how you're feeling, tell us where you're from, tell us your favorite books, but don't be afraid to chit chat. We will take some questions at the end. And also to remind everybody, books are available at childrensbookworld.net, so you can go there and order your books. And I am going to now magically disappear and let Rachel and Fran take it over.
Whoa.
Hello. Hi, Rachel. It's so nice to see you.
It is nice to see you as well.
Before
it's been so long.
we get rolling, I just want to jump in there and say thank you so much to Heather and everyone at Children's Book World for hosting us. This is so, so great. And thank you to everyone out there supporting indie bookstores through the 437th day of March, 2020.
I'm impressed you actually kept track of how long March has been.
I should
endless March.
Clarify, because this is the internet. This is February 12th, 2022, and not the 437th day of March 2020. And we are so, so glad to hang out together again and talk about this wonderful book that I feel like I have been reading for some time now. And I'm so glad to see it in the world. In the Serpent's Wake is beautiful. Rachel, congratulations.
Oh, well, thank you.
I know you've heard it from the New York Times and from Bookshelf and Kirkus and everywhere else. And I just wanted to say it is the best. And I'm happy that it is in the world. And I want to talk about the amazing cast. And I want to talk about the amazing boats and the journey and all of these things. But I have one question to start off. It's kind of a softball question.
Okay.
How many times did you cry while you were writing this? Softball question.
What kind of softball question is that? Like, I don't actually know. I don't keep track of these things.
I cried a lot when I was reading it, so I just
okay. I'm not sure I cried much while writing it. I cried reading my editor's comments.
Well, I mean, that's
yeah. That's always the thing. But yeah, I think it's probably a good thing that I didn't cry while writing, actually, because times when I've cried while writing, it usually has meant that there's something really wrong, and kind of globally rather than with the book. So, but I appreciate that there's some moments in it, and I certainly enjoy hearing about other people's tears. We feed on these as authors, This is our
yes. It's like plants and light, writers and tears. It's true. And this book it follows one of my favorite books in the whole world, Tess of the Road. And if you haven't read Tess of the Road, this is a good time to do so. But this book has familiar characters, Tess being one, Pathka being another, who is a good friend of mine. I feel I totally get sort of lots of things there. But also there's sort of the Countess Magrath that really has a bigger role to play. And we see some other people and individuals who are dragons, say, reappear. Can you talk about that? Bringing this amazing crew back together again.
Well, that was very rewarding. And I think one thing that may surprise some readers that hasn't been the case in any of my other books, is that I do some point of view shifts in this book. And one of the reasons for that is at some point I figured out that the story was too large to be encompassed by one solitary main character. With honestly, in some ways, I almost wish I could go back and do the second Seraphina book that way. Like, I don't think I had the courage in those days to do that. I really stuck to her point of view, which meant she had to be here and here and here and here and travel to all the places, have one person, seeing all the things. So this book actually, the book taught me in some ways, how do you decide whose turn it is and who needs to be the person telling this part here. And so many of the edits, I don't remember, full disclosure here, Fran was one of my readers for ship verisimilitude, because Fran knows all the ship things, and I know zero. And so,
for clarity, she means boats.
Actual, this is Tessa in boats. Yes. And so I can't remember, like, if the first draft of it that you read, if it was all Tess back in those days.
It was all Tess, but then I saw the second version and I loved that too, because that gave voice to so many new people.
Yeah.
But I loved Tessa's. I thought, Tessa's point of view is a favorite also. I admit I have several favorites among these characters.
Well, good. I hope other readers will have that experience as well.
Yeah,
and I do too. Like, it was just a joy, a real.
So, who are your favorites?
Pleasure. Oof. Well, I'll tell you.
And who got what was coming to them? We'll get there next.
We don't need too many spoilers, though. But I think readers who are astute will already know. If you haven't read it yet, you'll know who you hope gets what's coming to them. So maybe they will. No, I think the dark horse for me was Spira. Spira was a dragon scholar who was kind of a rival to Tess back in her early adventures. Spira comes into their own in this book just amazingly. And I didn't expect it. I was just like, well, we need a perspective. Well, maybe Spira would work. And I got working with them, and they blew my mind. And there was so much more to them that I hadn't understood. I
think a lot of the characters in the book hadn't understood either.
Yeah. Well, Spira themselves hadn't understood Spira.
That's true. Yes.
Bless their little dragon heart, was very, kind of rigidly holding things together, and had to kind of learn to unclench and accept new possibilities and think in different directions. And that was fun too. And find love. Let's tell the truth here. We got a little tiny romance occasionally here and there. So just tiny. But that was fun. The Countess too surprised me, was somebody I was nervous about going into it, and with any character, you kind of have to find the places where you and that character intersect. And I found ways to do it. One of the ways, I had been taking fencing for the last few years. The pandemic has kind of put a halt to that. But this book has some sword play scenes in it, which were some of the most fun for me to write, because I was never one to write fight scenes. Like, I was shied away from that. I just didn't think they were interesting. I don't enjoy reading other people's fight scenes. I just like, Taking fencing, though, you get an appreciation for the mental side of the game. And so I was able to write her fight scenes with a view toward, like, the way you have to be thinking when you're actually fighting sword to someone, which is you have to have a theory of mind for them. You have to have an idea of what they're going to do next, right? It's very much like chess in that way. You have to kind of be able to predict what their move is going to be. And if I do this, they'll react this way, which means I can then do the other thing. And so that was fun to write. That was different. And so trying to think what other perspectives we got. There's a fellow named Lord Hamish, who I'm not gonna. He's a little surprised his identity, so I'm not gonna try not to spoil him. But he was very different for me. We have a little bit of Giacomo. I think there's one chapter from Pathka's perspective, which was great. I love Patka dearly too.
I love Patka so much. And I want to talk about, because I mean, the one thing that I loved so much about Tess is that these characters are messy. These characters make mistakes all the time and learn things from them. And it's the learning that's really part of their character arcs. And that continues. There are lots of mistakes made and lots of sort of previously held conceptions about the way the world works. And everybody gets to unpack those in different ways. And Patka in particular has a very particular way of unpacking mistakes. Can we talk about the biting?
I know you love the biting, Fran. All right.
I think it's a very effective, if not appropriate for, us to do in real life. It's a very effective mental notation for, you hurt me. And and let's get it over with, and then we'll move on. If you survive.
Yes. Well, Patka, for those who haven't read the first book, is a quigotle, which are kind of a small kind of dragon, but they're like large iguanas. They don't fly. Their wings are sort of vestigial and have transformed into sort of bony hands. Actually, they got an extra set of hands. They're craft lizards, for lack of a better word, in that they've got little flaming tongues, and so they make things. They can extrude metal and glass and do all kinds of things. They're very interesting creatures. They expanded a lot for me in Tess of the Road. Like I'd had them in Shadow Scale, and then I expanded that in Tess of the Road and learned more about them. And so a thing though that they do, and they're very straightforward this way in some ways, is that when someone has hurt you, one quigotle to another, right, you get to bite them. And that's
no biting. Biting is bad. But
yeah, don't do that in real life. We're not going to do that in real life, okay? But one quigotle will bite another, and then that's it. That resolves it in some way, right? And that they have a sort of a physiological need to bite, and if they can't bite each other, they actually get kind of like a problem. they have sort of an ailment almost until they can finally bite someone. And so there was a moment in Tess of the Road too where Tess was like, what if you can't bite someone? What if that person has left and you can't, even metaphorically, whatever the metaphorical biting, what if you can't do that? And so Patka, talks to her about that and says, Patka, you bite yourself and then you let go, is his way of trying to make that a metaphor for her. So, which is something that then Tess does. Tess then has to look at what happened so that she can let go of it. That if you're not,
I think it's a metaphorical thing. It's not like, I want to just say, Patka is bigger on the inside. Patka might be small, but there's so much there, and that metaphor of it's not just, it's the important thing is the letting go afterwards and moving on with your life.
Right.
And that's really cool, Rachel, that you have developed this.
Thank you.
But I think also that other characters like Tess in particular, in this book, they're on a path where they are having to let go of certain preconceived assumptions about themselves and about the world in order to rescue Patka. This is really part of the importance of this book, is that this little dragon that, originally in Seraphina was kind of an afterthought, and then in Tess, everybody thought, oh, these little dragons are just terrible pains, which they can be. But suddenly the act of saving the world is all tied up in the act of saving this one tiny dragon.
Now that's a good way of talking about it. And I mean, this book is in many ways about saving the world just as an idea in general. And can you, right? Can you even? I think for me, one of the things I was trying to get at was that there are problems in the world that are really big, like really, really big. I think we're all feeling it really hard right now after 2 years of pandemic and,
everything else.
Potential war in Ukraine and climate disaster and all the things, right? And so many of our stories are about someone heroic coming in and saving everybody, right? Or a small group of heroes even, but it's heroes. Heroes can do it. And so you're going to be the protagonist of a book or the protagonist of your life. How do you reconcile those things? Because none of us are big enough to save the world right now, unfortunately. And so how do you find what you can save? What is yours to save? You know, Tess goes through this book trying to save a whole bunch of different things from a whole bunch of different angles and failing again and again until she finally figures out which things are hers. And in the end, even Pafka isn't hers to save. She gets Pafka as far as she can, and now I'm spoiling my whole book. And Pafka does go on. Pafka does turn out okay. Nobody panic. But at the end of the day, she has to let go, even of Pafka, for Pafka's sake, and that's hard, and it's hard to feel like the hero when I think you can only do this much.
But the multiple voice narrative allows for everybody to take part in the work instead of it being one hero. Because one of my problems with the hero narrative is it's always that other person. It's that other guy. And when you have multiple people taking part in different parts of the work, then you can start to see how you might fit into a narrative yourself where you're doing some of the work as well.
Right. Well, and they all fail in their own different ways too. So much failure. Isn't everyone excited about this book now? Like, wow, let's watch everyone fail. But again, that's one reason why it had to be multiple perspectives too, because I was having Tess fail all the different ways, and there were too many ways. You know, at some point, my editor was like, "Look, she's learned this lesson already. Why is she failing this way?" I was like, "Oh, okay, maybe you're right. Okay." So, you know, having to go back and
we've touched upon this a little bit, but what you're saying right now and what you've just said over the past couple of minutes speaks to something that I wanted to ask about, because you've got this world in your head of Seraphina and Tess and Pafka and the Countess Megadeth, and it has its own landscape, and characters pass each other by, don't even know it, in separate stories sometimes. And it feels a bit like a medieval piece of artwork in that aspect of things, where it's almost like there are meta narratives going on. There are stories within stories. And I really, really love that. There's that, you know, that aspect of like the Volcarol story, for instance, that tells you that there's not a monoculture in this world. There are multiple layers, and figuring all of that out. How did you do that?
Sorry. First of all, I really like the way you describe my work, Fran, and I could just sit here and listen to you describe it some more. But yes, I have to answer questions, I guess. It took time. This book took 4 years to write, and those layers I do write in layers. That's how it happens. The metaphor I like to use, and this is actually from Renaissance art too, and I got this metaphor from my mother. She's the one that taught me this is a thing. But in the Renaissance, one of the ways people would paint is with a kind of paint called egg tempera, which is very transparent, really. And the only way to do it is to like put on a little layer, you know, and let it dry, and then put on a little more layer. And so over time, it becomes more and more opaque, and you can build it up. And so I feel like that's a good metaphor for my writing, the way I write, that you start out, you know, with a little layer. And it's so hard for me in the beginning days too, to be patient with the transparency of it early on. Yeah. So yeah, stories within stories though, you mentioned the Volcarai story. When I figured that out, that little piece out, it's one of those things. I don't know if you ever have these moments where you've been working on a story, working, and suddenly you have this idea and you're like, I've solved it. I've solved the whole story. I am a genius, right? And then you feel really good and you pat yourself on the back. And then like half an hour later, you realize, oh, I still have to write this thing. and then it all falls down on you like a ton of bricks. Yes, that's a thing that happens to writers. Well, this was one of those cases where I thought of that story and I was like, this is it, the thing that will tie everything together. And I don't know, I read a few reviews. I haven't read too many, but like nobody mentions it. I don't know if anybody noticed it, but
Stu, I have a question for you. Would you want to read that part, or would you want to read something else?
Well, I was actually going to read something tangentially related, not the Vulgarized story, but I was going to read the story that Tess tells when she's asked to tell a story, because she comes to this place and there's all these storytellers, and they are she has to tell us, she has bad news to give, but she has to tell a story before she's allowed to give the bad news. So she tells the first story that she can think of. And actually, I should back up a tiny bit, though, because the deal with the Vulgarized story. Vulgarized is a story about this bootmaker who falls in love with a tiger, right? He makes her a pair of boots, and she puts them on, and they're useless because tigers can't wear boots, and she skids around, and she drowns, and she dies. So this is a story that's told all over the islands and all the different island nations. In some places, it's a comedy, because what a dum-dum. Some places, it's a tragedy, because he killed the thing he loves. Some places it's history, because it's actually it's a metaphor for a thing that really happened. The tiger is actually the queen of the tiger people and not a literal tiger. And so Tess, over the course of this book, hears the story different ways, many different times. And in the end, has to find her own meaning for it. In the end, she has a kind of a little epiphany, and it's a very small moment, but it's an epiphany where she suddenly understands what this story means for her and how she can apply it to her life, and she does. And that to me is a very beautiful moment. So anyway, there's stories and stories. So Tess tells this story in a different story, not a Vulgarized story. In all innocence, it's a story she loved as a child. If you recall from Tess of the Road, she was very fond of the tales of the pirate Dosarius and his valiant crew. And this is a Dosarius story. And only when it's coming out of her mouth to these, this group of assorted islanders from different nations, only then is she able to hear what it must sound like to them. And so here's the story. Once upon a time, Dosarius defeated Portobaldus, the dread giant, and took the luxuries of his house, bolts of silk, gold and furs, and nutmegs. He particularly wanted the giant's magical heat-proof gloves, which Portobaldus had used to dig into a volcano and grab out molten rock. Of course, the gloves were far too big, so Dosarius had his tailor refashion one into a fine suit of clothes. In a dusty corner of the giant's house, Dosarius found a treasure map which showed where Portobaldus had buried the magic rubies of Argopoppus. They were quite nearby, along the seashore, and Dosarius thought he and his valorous crew could certainly spare some time to retrieve them. Upon sailing to the place indicated by the map, a stretch of white sandy beach, they were dismayed to see an enormous sandcastle standing where the treasure was supposedly buried. Ordinarily, this would have been no obstacle. They were pirates. They'd kicked over sandcastles before, but this particular castle was swarming with very large crabs. Dosarius sent forth his 7 most fearsome fighters to deal with the crabs. They approached the sandcastle and cried, "We have come for the rubies of King Argopoppus. Hand them over, and no one gets hurt." The crabs scoffed at this, and so the 7 pirates attacked the castle. 3 were killed, and the rest were beaten and injured. These were exceptionally ferocious crabs. Their carapaces were as wide as dinner plates and as hard as steel. Their claws were strong enough to snap a grown man's wrist or put a crimp in his sword. "Well, this is humiliating," said Dosarius' first mate, Marsupius. "We're not going to be driven off by mere crustaceans, I hope." "Of course not," said Dosarius. "They're tough, I'll grant. But the tougher the foe, the softer his underbelly. Follow my lead. I'll show you how to defeat them." This time, Dosarius himself went ashore with Marsupius and some other men. He did not approach the crab's stronghold, but began setting up camp a ways down the beach. He had his men bring all the softest cushions and the most luxuriant furnishings from the ship, as if this were the campsite of a king. The crabs watched suspiciously, then sent an emissary to parley. "What are you doing to our beach?" said the crab crabbily, examining Dosarius' wafting silk tents, gilt tables, and the copper cauldron on the fire. We greatly admire your fine city, said Dosarius merrily, but noticed that you lack a few of the refinements of civilization. We thought we'd found a city of our own over here so that we could trade our luxury goods and teach you how to be gentlemen. The crabs thought this was a splendid idea, so Dosarius traded them 7 bolts of silk for a pile of seashells and a sack of sand fleas. His crewmen thought he'd gone mad, but whenever they tried to ask Dosarius what he was doing, he tapped the side of his nose and said, "Patience, all will become clear." The crabs tried making themselves silk robes, but they fit very awkwardly. "Well, of course they do," said Dosarius when the crabs complained. "Nobody wears silk robes over armor. In fact, nobody wears armor at all in a civilized city. It gives the wrong impression, as if you were frightened and insecure, not the lords of your own destiny." The crabs removed their heavy carapaces, stacking them behind their sandcastle, and found that the silk robes now draped properly and looked much better. However, there was still the problem of the silk getting caught in their claws. It snagged and tore most grievously. "Well, of course it does," said Dosarius when they complained. "You don't see my companions and me trying to get dressed with weapons in our hands, do you? Refined people know when to set their weapons aside. In a safe, civilized society, you don't need to go around armed all the time." The crabs could not set their claws aside, alas, but Dosarius suggested binding them shut with colorful thread. It was practical and fashionable. The crabs loved it and stood in line for their claws to be bound. "You've improved yourselves," said Dosarius warmly. "I would like to have a great feast in your honor, but first I must purify myself before the gods." He stoked the fire under his great copper cauldron until the water was swiftly boiling. Then he leaped in with his clothes on, that is to say, wearing the suit made from the giant's heat-proof glove. The crabs gasped at the steam rising up. "Can you not bathe in the ocean?" they asked. Dosarius feigned surprise. "You're worried for my safety? How kind. But our gods are very powerful and would never allow their devoted servants to come to harm." "How do they know you're devoted?" said the king of the crabs greedily, already thinking what he could do with that kind of divine protection. "We prove it by bathing in a boiling cauldron and demonstrating absolute trust," said Dosarius. "You're welcome to perform these same ablutions with all your people, but first, let me come out and dry myself." Dosarius climbed out and fresh water was put in the pot. All the crabs eagerly climbed in. At first they were quite content, for the water was only pleasantly warm. "It's boiling ferociously," said Dosarius. "Do you not feel it?" The crabs could not feel it, for of course it wasn't true. Dosarius stoked the fire higher. Some of the crabs began to feel it, but none of them dared admit that the gods had not granted their protection. The water grew hotter, and still the crabs stoically pretended that it wasn't hurting them. Only when bubbles began to rise in earnest from the bottom of the pot did they understand that they had been deceived. Panicked, they squirmed and writhed and screamed for mercy, but their claws had been bound, so they couldn't pull themselves out, and their carapaces had been removed, so they couldn't bear the weight of other crabs upon their backs. Dosarius enjoyed his promised feast, a great pot of boiled crabs. His crew, finally understanding his purpose, shared it with him. When they knocked down the sandcastle and dug into the sand, however, the magic rubies were nowhere to be found. And thus, Dosarius never considered this exploit a real victory, for he traded the lives of 3 men and 7 bolts of silk for nothing but a crab dinner and a day at the beach. So,
well, that was. I mean, crabs are delicious, and personally, from having crab characters in my own books lately, I have a great admiration for what you did there. That was a very well told tale. And it was it was like a fable almost. It had fable aspects to it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. No, that was fun. Yeah. It was fun to write. It was.
Well, thank you for reading to us. We
really
loved that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, as you can imagine, right, here is Tess on this ship with the colonizers come to the island and telling this story to the island people, and they're hearing, "You are the crabs," right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
That's what I was thinking of when I was like, wow, that was an interesting choice of reading.
Yeah. Yeah. And yes. Well, it's one of the moments where Tess blows it. and only realizes after she's told, right? And then she's like, oh crap. What? I didn't mean it that way. I was just telling us a story. But it's also, I think, about how stories inform our expectations.
Yes.
And that so many things that we perpetrate in the world, we see first in stories. And so, it makes a difference, the kind of things that we're hearing, or the kind of, it affects what we think is possible, what we think is desirable, what we think is meaningful. And so, you know, it's a fun thing as a writer to to explore and really dig into, because and it's sort of meta at the same time, right? That you know that you're writing. I mean, you're writing the story about stories, but you're writing a story, and so your story is going to like go out in the world and do things too, and so I don't know. I like that's another layer, and I like it.
Tess manages to unpack that pretty well at that point. She's picked up a lot of skills for sort of unscrewing up.
Well, I think so over time, you know. Well, I mean, all of Tessa the Road is basically her screwing up too. So she has a lot of practice, you know, out here making mistakes, so you don't have to. Which is sometimes how I've felt about myself and my own life. I have 2 younger sisters, and they've told me as much, that they used to like watch me carefully of things I would get in trouble for, and then be like, okay, I won't do that. That was a bad choice. Yeah.
Sisters, man.
Yeah, I know, right? And so you go out there and blunder away, and I'm glad I could help. You know? Yeah.
Well, I have a couple more questions.
Okay.
And then, friends out there in the world, we are going to have some time for Q&A, and I can see a couple of, thank you, Eugene, questions appearing, and I'm sure Katie, who is out there watching me, probably has some questions too, I hope. But so get your typing fingers ready and type some questions in the chat so that we can answer them in about 10 minutes. But before that, I have a couple more questions for you, Rachel.
I'll try not to be quite so long-winded.
This book, Tess the Road, is about a long walk. That's the journey. This book is much more about voyages in different spaces, including by sea. And you had to write a lot of boats and different sailing tactics and different approaches. And I know that you went through several passes, but what was the hardest thing to write when it came to boats?
Oof. For me, I think it was just making sure I got kind of a physical feel to it, because I didn't get to have that experience. The pandemic came along. I had really aspired to take the so-called Inside Passage up the coast of British Columbia to Haida Gwaii, you know, and it's a long, long ferry ride, basically. But I thought, you know, that'll give me some, you know, sea on my face and a breeze, and, you know. So talking to you, and also talking to my sister has a friend who sails competitively, and he showed us, we got to see his boat, although not sail on it, but he showed me, I was very moved by this. He showed me the little like crevice where he sleeps when they're out there sailing, and the deck of the ship is literally like 6 inches away from his face. And I was like, is it loud? People walking over? He's like, yes, it's very loud. You know? Yeah. And so stuff like that was helpful. But yeah, there's different kinds of boats, and there's, you know, there was a lot to research, and you know, I still want to go to Haida Gwaii. So I'm telling you, we got to find some writing buddies, and you and me and writing buddies, we'll do the writer's retreat up the Inner Passage.
I love it. I am
the
there.
World is not.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
I love seeing the questions come in too, Katie. Thank you so much. This is going to be great. This is going to be a fantastic Q&A. One of the things I remember was that you had Tess. You had Tess learning. She was coiling lines, and she was assigned to coil lines, and she was standing in the center of the line that she was coiling at the time. And then the boat took off, and I was like, she'd be like 10 feet up in the air right now.
There was that. There was Karis getting hurt. I had him get hurt in some way, and you were like, well, he's an old hand, and he would not fall for this. It's got to be something else. And so you helped me fix that.
Okay, cool. Yeah. What about seasickness?
I read up about that too. Well, I have an iron stomach.
You had a lot of landlubbers getting on boats, and they were pretty confident that it was going to be a great journey. How did you meet that expectation?
I don't know. I mean, that's how I would feel. I don't know. Poor Giacomo barfed a lot in this book. There was a lot of barfing. And Tess at one point does get seasick too, when she's in a little dinghy overnight. And she's like, yeah, okay, this is too much finally. Yeah. But that was another thing, something that was given perspective by my sister's friend, that he apparently, according to him, you don't get over being seasick. If you're prone to it, you'll always just be seasick, and that's how it is. And you know, there's some things you can do to kind of mitigate it, but it's there forever. And I was like, oh, I thought, because I figured you feel seasick for a bit, but then you're good, right? No? You get your sea legs, and then you're good. But no, not for him anyway. But again, I was going to brag about my iron stomach, which is I had a 20-year vomit-free streak from age 11 to age 31.
You guys didn't know what you were in for today, did you?
From age 11. And I remember I was 11 because it was my last year that I could have gone trick-or-treating, but I threw up, and so I wasn't allowed to go. So I knew. And then age 31. And so I went through college. I went through pregnancy, no barfing. And then I finally, when I was 31, I came to Canada, and I had the worst cold of my life, and I coughed so hard I made myself throw up.
Okay.
And that was, yeah. So I'm not prone to seasickness.
Super envious of you.
Yeah.
Super envious of you. We will talk seasickness stories another time when we have warned everybody beforehand so that they can opt in or out.
I am apologizing to everyone.
A couple more questions that I have for you. One is that you revised this book during lockdown, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about creativity and writing during lockdown, but revision during lockdown is a whole other ball of wax, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, honestly, I was glad to have it to do, because there were so many other more unpleasant things that I didn't want to have to think about, and so it was actually, in a way, a nice place to escape to. I usually find writing to be work. I don't think of it as an escape. It's like a thing I take on. But in this case, it was easier than all the other stuff that was going on. So that part was all right. I mean, it's the projects that have come after that have been a little bit more challenging. Like how do I motivate myself to keep moving? Having writer friends helps. I'm pointing at you. So
pointing right back at you. Those aren't finger guns. I was just pointing.
Okay. But yeah. No, it in a way, I mean, the biggest adjustment, honestly, was that everybody was home, and I was used to having very quiet and nobody here, and I can write in my underwear or whatever. But all of a sudden, I mean, I don't, but I could. It's the principle of the thing. But all of a sudden, my husband has his teaching classes and has office, upstairs, and my son was home doing home online school.
The dog.
Yeah. So people are like, oh, isolation, but this was more people than I was used to.
Yeah.
So that was an adjustment.
So what are you working on now? Because I know it's related.
It is related. Well, first of all, last year, I finished it a year ago, and they took them a year to get it out. So during the last year, I wrote what I think is possibly a middle grade horror, but it might not be middle grade. It might not really be horror either. I'm not sure. But it's set in the same world. Everything, my brain sets things in this world. It's just how it works for me. And it's about 100 years, I want to say, earlier than Seraphina. It's actually kind of not related. I don't have any overlapping characters. I don't have even places. And so that part is very different.
There's a valley that Tess walks through.
Not in that book. That's in the adult book. Okay. The adult book is connected to Tess.
Yeah.
And there are even some characters in the book that Tess.
You can bite me later.
I'm not gonna, but I'm not gonna. I don't know. I'm gonna hold back, and you'll be like, wait, who? Someone on Tessa's journey. She meets some characters in there. So I'm writing an adult book then that intersects with Tessa's journey, just very glancingly. And the valley, right, that she walks through. Because I was whining to you about that valley. That's why the valley is in your mind. I had to draw a map, and I was grumbling about that. Yes. So that's sort of maybe an adult book. And I feel like one of the reasons I did like young adult, I feel like I have always kind of written, they're kind of adulty, really. you know, and so like maybe dividing the adult parts into one place and the younger parts into another place. Maybe I can, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just I'm just writing what occurs to me. So
you're doing what you don't know really, really well.
Oh, thank you.
My last question for you, right as you take a sip of your water, and this is opening the door to all of your questions out there, is what are you reading these days?
I am reading a bunch of different stuff. Actually, one of my New Year's resolutions is to A, read more actual books and less doom scrolling, and B, like keep track of them. Mm-hmm. And so I actually know what I've just read, which is I've been reading some Lindsay Davis mysteries. They're mysteries set in ancient Rome. Her latest series, she had a series about Marcus Didius Falco, and those were wonderful. But now is Falco's daughter, Flavia Albia, and mystery where she's solving mysteries in ancient Rome. They're kind of light and fluffy, but they're very well researched. And if you're a nerd about ancient Rome, they're just fun. And I'm also most recently reading Eden Robinson's Trickster trilogy. So I read Son of a Trickster, and I'm just now finished Trickster Drift, and I need to grab the third one. Eden Robinson is indigenous from right here in BC, and the stories are about a indigenous boy who is the son of Weegit, who's Raven, and his life is bad in many ways. I mean, there's addiction, there's abuse, there's all kinds of stuff happening, and that's hard to take and hard to deal with. But it's also intersects with this, like the spirit world or an alternate universe or something where Weegit comes from. That stuff is weirder. And so he actually, that's the stuff he tries to shut down. Usually when you have a book like that, you know, where the real world is hard, but fantasy world saves you. This is like, he's like, nope, no fantasy world. Everything's hard enough. So finally in the second book, though, he actually turned into a raven, and now he's like, ugh. I guess.
That sounds great.
They're funny. They're wonderful. They really are. They're marketed as adult here in Canada, but they read like young adult to me. I assume they did this because there's like sex and drugs, and maybe they were thinking it would be easier to have fewer challenges. I know book challenges are a thing down south now, and up here too. Who are we kidding? So, you know, maybe they're protecting her that way, or maybe she doesn't think of them as young adult books. You know, maybe she really did think these are adult books, and so, but they read like young adult to me. So, anyway, they're delightful. So, if anyone, I highly recommend those. Yes,
wonderful. I will look those up. Thank you so much for the recommendations. And that is where we come to the end of the formal discussion, which included biting and barfing. Yes, but that's what we do here.
I do apologize.
And just, Rachel, thank you so much for talking with me today. I'm going to turn over the mic to Heather.
Hello. That was wonderful. Thank you both. That was really, really delightful. I like this sort of kicking back on my couch and getting to hear y'all talk instead of being at the store on my hard stool. So let me get to some of these questions. Here we go. From Eugene. So, pandemic writing, fun, right? How did you do it? Now, I know you touched upon this a little. So also kind of along those lines, curiously, were there things that you didn't do during the pandemic in your writing that you discovered were good for your writing habits that you will carry on?
Oh, that's interesting. I'm not sure about that. I feel like pandemic, the big thing is to stop the obsessing over what's happening in the world. That is the hardest thing right now. And it's not just the pandemic. It's like all the things. Most recently, you know, we have this whole like cavalcade of truckers up here in Canada. And that has been my distraction for the last week, where I just look at it and get irate. And, but unplugging from that and turning off, I think connecting with friends has actually been very important. And I'll point at Fran again, but you know, that Fran and we have a little like video chat like every other week, basically for half an hour. And that kind of resets it. The other thing I think that really has made a difference to me is I'm teaching now at UBC, and my students are such amazing people, and they remind me why I'm doing this. Nice. You know, because they're so enthusiastic, and you read their stuff and you're just like, yeah, writing is awesome. You remember, and then you're like, oh, okay. So you teach too, don't you, Fran? I think. And
yes. And same thing. My students are amazing, and I swear they get smarter every year. I don't know how I'm going to keep up for a long time, but they're so excited about the things that I'm excited about. So we like elevate each other. And that's what happens when I talk to friends online, or, you know, I do a challenge, like a writing challenge or something, that you remember in the midst of all of this, that there are things that really brighten your heart that have to do with craft and creativity. And a lot of those go back to the people that, you know, and I'm seeing these faces out there in the audience, like Katie and Eugene, and you guys are part of this too. So this is just great to see everyone there.
Yes.
So speaking of Katie, they have a couple questions. Here we go. They say this is a selfish question. I don't think it's so selfish. How do you maintain energy for the book when it takes 4 years to write? Please help. I think there are a lot of people who would like to know the answer to that question.
It is hard. It is hard. The thing for me that makes a big difference is I always write books so far. I'm pretending like this is a choice, but I kind of do it by accident. But I write books that are too hard for me. And when I start writing them, I am not, in fact, a good enough writer to write them. And so this has always been, I think this is just my personality. And I don't know that
You're such a gamer.
Well, is that the word we're looking for?
Yes.
Right. If something is hard, I'm like, oh yeah. I'm like a scrappy little dog, like woof, woof. Just like, okay, keep punching it. This is why I enjoyed fencing too, because I was terrible at it. Like I made it sound like I was cool. I'm terrible at it, but there was always a chance that I might win this time against my 80-year-old fencing master. He was 80 years old, and he learned fencing in Paris at like the fencing university. Apparently there's a thing like that. And anyway, and he would just tease me, and he was just like, ha, 80-year-old man. But I was like, okay, I can do this. I can do it this time. And I'm like that with the book too. So that's part of it is my personality. The other part, though, I think is that my editor is a little bit slow. And so it's not like you're working solidly for 4 years. You work, you get it done, you throw it at him. And then the way he works, I get a month off. And I know other writers would write a different thing during that time, and I would just take the month off. So I had the luxury of doing that, and I think it made a difference. You know, I would be able to recoup, play video games for a month, get your strength back, and then go at it again. And he was also very, very kind and lenient about deadlines. You know, because I think one of the things that happens too is sometimes we're given deadlines, and the publisher or the editor being really strict about it, and then you don't have the option. And so being able to take 4 years to do it is a gift, honestly. And so I was actually lucky for that reason, if that makes sense.
Back to the fencing thing for a second. You know, if you came back and worked at the store again, one of our coworkers is a fencing coach.
Oh.
We could have a CBW fencing team.
That would be so awesome.
Other bookstore who has a fencing team. We could be the first. Okay, Katie has another question.
Okay.
This world expands upon the world you built in Seraphina and Shadow Scale as well. Did you know this part of the world when you wrote Seraphina and Shadow Scale, or did you have to expand it as you went and make sure it fit with your world building rules?
That's a great question.
I expand as I go. I do. Even in tests, there were things that I was discovering that I hadn't known before. And here's my, and I tell my students this, you don't have to know the whole world. You don't know this world, right? None of us do. We don't know everything. And so there's always new things to learn. And to me, that is exciting. And talk about keeping yourself interested, right? discovering new things is exciting for me. And so realizing there are new parts and now making it so it doesn't contradict what's come before, that part is more challenging and a little tyrannical. Like every now and then you wish you could do a thing and you can't because you already, but the middle grade thing I'm working on now has ghosts in it, and we have not previously seen ghosts. And so I'm like, how can there be ghosts? And what are the ghosts, where are they from? And how does this work? And how can they fit? And why doesn't anybody talk about it? This is something Fran kept bugging me about. How come nobody mentions ghosts in all of Seraphina? I was like, because they're sophisticated city folk who don't believe in ghosts. But but yeah, so yes, that you can run into those sorts of challenges, and those can be frustrating. Something I think though, and this maybe it's cheating, maybe it's not, but I think the fallibility of your narrator is helpful here, right? That we can say if Seraphina was wrong, or or Tess got this wrong, and Tess misinterpreted what was happening. I do that with the Quiggle language. I don't know if anybody remembers this. There's just a fleeting moment where Seraphina had described Quiggle as being just Mutya with a bad lisp, Mutya being the dragon language with a bad lisp. And so then Tess, who learns Quiggle language first, describes, the dragon language as just, Kutla, the Quiggle language with a sinus condition, right? And so having the languages be, different perspectives on it. So who's right, who's, that kind of thing is really fun. So there's all kinds of scope for that as well. But yeah, I think all my books are probably set in the same world because, like I said, my brain is set there.
Another question from Katie.
Yay! Katie's asking great questions. This is good. I could listen all day.
I know. Since you opened the door to this, Rachel, you write YA that crosses over very well to adult. Do you think about this when you're writing? Does it ever cause problems, aka you're pressured by publishing to make it firmly one or the other?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I in fact, don't think about it. But again, can I just say my editor, who was I have the same editor for all 4 of these books, we had our moments where we butted heads, but in fact, he was a delightful and lovely person. And he was always just like, write the book. I'll worry about marketing. I just, you do what you're going to do. I love it. He was really supportive that way and didn't believe in writing to the, the formula or whatever. And so I was fortunate that way. In terms of being pressured by publishing, I am worried about this middle grade thing. I have no idea. Like it has multiple perspectives too, and some of them are adults. And I'm like, can you do that in middle grade? I hope you can. I don't know. And so it's at my agent right now, and my agent will probably have opinions. This is gonna be my first time on sub in 100 years, and so
And you have a wonderful friend right there, Fran, who has written wonderful middle grade.
True.
So there you go.
True. That's true. Is it middle grade, Fran?
So yes. I have a couple questions from some young writers who come to the store often.
Yes.
And watch this on the replay because they're teens and they're out and about on a Saturday night. So they wrote some questions for me. And you can tell they're going to be good writers because these are good questions.
Yeah.
If you could tell your younger writing self anything, what would it be? And I'd like you both to answer it, Fran, if you don't mind too. Okay. So if you could tell your younger writing self anything, what would it be?
Gosh, do you want to go first? Do you want to go second?
Yeah, I will go first.
Okay.
That there is so much more waiting in publishing than I ever imagined. And that, you think people are just writing books and they're just coming out immediately, and they're not, and sometimes you send stuff to the editor and the editor can't get to it yet, or your agent can't. And there's a lot of patience required that I wouldn't have guessed. I thought you would just be autonomously, boop, it comes out. Nope. I don't know, Fran, how about you?
2 things. One, and I've said this before, is don't be afraid to be who you are. that's really, really important. There's a lot of writers out there who are like, oh no, I have to do this, or I have to write these books in order to make my goals. And it's good to understand sort of the patterns of the industry, but at the end of the day, write the story that you love, because that's and then once you're done writing that story, write another one and write another one after that. Don't just stop. So that's one. And the other is, when someone tells you that they don't like the thing that you've done, the book that you've done, and your gut reaction is, well, you're wrong. Listen to that. That is really important. Don't let anybody stop you from writing that book. And Rachel's been helping me realize that lately, because I've got a thing that is possibly, going to be out there sooner or later. And I got stalled writing it. I really got stuck, and I'm so glad that I got the sharp, pointy elbow nudge to keep going with it. So
next question.
Yes.
This is a little easier, maybe.
Okay.
How many hours a day do you write?
It can vary quite a bit, depending on what other things I have going on in life. But actually, and I read something recently that made me feel a lot better about this. But like, apparently you can only be sustainably creative for like 2 to 3 hours a day. And that even people who are working 9 to 5 office jobs, the actual amount of work they do, if you squished it down, would only be, there's an awful lot of busy work or checking your email or, going to the water cooler. So that made me feel a little better, because I think ultimately, like, the actual amount of time I spend writing a day is probably actually in that range. And so, but that's on the one. On the other hand, it's a job that you never turn up. I mean, I think about it constantly. Did you do that, Fran?
Oh my gosh,
walking the dog, or
the times that I have my hands in water, like I'm doing the dishes or I'm cleaning something, or like you're in the shower, like that's when the idea comes, because your brain is such a jerk and it knows that you can't do anything. I actually got shower crayons so I could write stuff down in the shower and be like,
that is a great idea.
But that for me too. It's not how long I write or how many hours a day I write, because if I'm really into the story, I'll write longer. And if I'm struggling with plot, or if I'm still trying to figure out, like, that sort of egg wash metaphor that you used is a really good one, because that first draft that I write is sometimes a struggle. And so it's more about putting the writing first before I answer my emails, before sorry, students, before I do my grading. If I do my writing first, I've got that sort of clarity of vision and that beginner's mind back that is really important before all of the sort of clutter of the day gets in there. And that's much more important than how long I write.
Can I just add to that? For me, my best writing time is early in the morning. Like, discover how your brain works, because you'll find when there will usually be a certain time of day when your brain is the happiest and willing to do things. My brain actually is very happy first thing in the morning, and an hour in the morning is worth 2 in the evening for me. And so it's different quality versus quantity kind of thing. But then if I can get done what I had to get done, before noon, then I feel like, I've done a thing. Even if the rest of the day is crappy, I've done a thing, and I've
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm the same. Plus, if you're drafting, like if you're just drafting, sometimes I do that before I have coffee, and so I'm half asleep, and it's great because it's just, it kind of comes out in a very fresh way that isn't constrained by what I think I should be doing. Mm-hmm. And that's useful to go back in for revision.
Nice. So, what is the most difficult part of your artistic process? We're asking like some heavy questions.
They are.
Hard.
Well, they
want to know.
Starting.
Yeah.
Starting is hard. The middle is the worst.
And the end, don't even get me started.
Oh my gosh, the end. No, if you can actually write the middle first. I did that once. I wrote the middle of Updraft before I wrote the beginning or the end. And that was the best because I never had to go through that sort of horrible, why am I doing this? This is the dumbest possible plot. My characters, I hate them all. Like that's the normal pattern for any sort of middle process for me. And every time I've got students who are writing a novel and they're like, oh, this is terrible, I want to quit. I'm like, well, where are you exactly in this book? And they're like, oh, I'm in the middle. I'm like, well, that's exactly right. That's how that feels. Because you're halfway there. And yeah.
All right, this is one of the last of their questions, and then we have another question from the chat. I like this question. What was the best money you ever spent as a writer?
Probably my fencing épée.
That's a great answer. I thought it was interesting. Like, I don't know if they were going for like joining an association or buying a good writing program but hey, there you go. You're fencing. I love it.
Well, because actually, in fact, can I just say, it is really useful to have a hobby that is not writing. Really, really useful to release your brain, to be your sort of therapy. I mean, I also sing, but that doesn't cost anything except to my listeners. But so getting enough exercise, though, that's actually really important.
How about you, Fran? Best money you ever spent as a writer?
I think that's a really great answer from Rachel. So I'm going to be real brief, but just when I have something to celebrate, spending a little bit of money to celebrate that win for me is a great thing. I buy fountain pens, and they're not always very expensive. Sometimes they're like, just little fountain pens, or I buy a bottle of ink, but then I can go through and look at them and say, that was this win. This was when I, sold this book, or this is when this short story I got a really great thing for. And just being able to celebrate them for me makes it really real. It feels real. So that just mark every win some way.
Nice. Okay, so from the chat, Patricia would like to know, I think this will be our final question, at what age did you start to imagine this fantasy world?
That's my mother-in-law. Hi, Pat. I'm glad she's here. Golly, I think I was about 12 years old. It was in 7th grade. I had a teacher who assigned a narrative poem, and I wrote a narrative, like it all came out in one go, which this never happens, but it all came out. It was a very silly poem, but it was called The First Adventure of Sir Amy, and it was about this girl who was a knight who was living in the land of Goredd, because it rhymed with Fred, which was the name of her horse. It was a very super rhymey 7th grade poem. But then it was my first time making up a world, and it stuck with me. And so through junior high and high school, anytime I had to write a story, I would set it there because I had my own world, and it changed so much. I mean, it was just like a fairy tale world, kind of generic in the poem, but it changed a lot. So, but yeah, see, that's a challenge I have talking to my own students, like about world building. They're like, how do we start world building? I was like, well, go back in time to when you were 12 years old. No.
Hey, that is awesome. So all of the kids out there, your world today could be your book tomorrow.
It could be.
There you go. So this was wonderful. Thank you both so much. I want to remind everybody we have copies of Rachel's and Fran's book at the store. So feel free to drop by or sign on and pick one up. And congratulations so much. I really appreciate you both being here. Thank you, everybody.
Heather. Yeah.
Have a great night.
Thank you so much for having us.